with Zoom. But if you would like to speak, please try first raising your physical hand. You can put the little icon up, but sometimes it blends into the background and I don't see it. And if I don't see you with your hand up, I do not mind if you wave it, so I see the motion. I would like everybody who wants to speak to get a chance to talk. While someone else is talking, if you can stay muted, that will keep out the background noises. You guys know the drill. So I don't think that's a problem. So I just want to also say something by way of introduction that I didn't say last time. When we're talking about literature, I hope you saw in our first session that there isn't just one way to read a piece of literature. There is not a right interpretation and a wrong interpretation. And I hope that the kinds of questions I was asking and the way I was guiding the discussion made that clear. So I don't want anyone to feel shy about voicing an idea or asking a question that you think might be different
Gail,
or
Lipsitz.
some way. Just, go ahead and say what you're thinking, because we're all going to learn from each other. And, every author, I think, would be thrilled to know if there's, for example, a difference of opinion. And actually, I've sort of almost deliberately chosen authors who have some ambiguity in their stories, which gives us room for discussion and different interpretations. So I just wanted to put that out there before we get going. Okay. Our first author, our only author tonight is Etgar Keret. I hope you had a chance to read his bio. And I am going to be sending you, thanks to Valerie, I'm going to be sending you a wonderful recording of him speaking with Ira Glass on This American Life on NPR, where he talks about some of the influences on him as a writer, particularly his parents. And he reads 8 very short stories about his mother, who had passed away not long before. But you really get a sense of his personality and his approach to writing from this interview or this conversation. It's really a conversation with Ira Glass. And I think you'll find it it's about an hour. So I'll send it to Valerie after we finish tonight. And then thank you, Valerie, in advance for sharing it with everybody. The first question I would like to ask is, how many of you were familiar with the work of Etgar Keret before I shared these 2 stories with you? Just raise your hand. Keep them up because I'm looking on my other screen. Okay, not too many. Good, that's good. It's good, it's fine. How many of you have ever had a chance to hear him speak, like on YouTube or in person? Okay, nobody on this screen. Sandra. Okay. Well, you'll definitely, from this from this recorded conversation with Ira Glass, you'll definitely get a chance. But I would urge you, he does tour a lot. And I think he's been to Baltimore at least 3 times since I first heard of him. And I forgot if I've heard him twice or 3 times, but I would urge you, if you ever get the chance to see and hear him in person, he's really a very interesting personality, very open to questions, and he likes discussion. His English is very good, so I think you would enjoy it. But I'm going to start with the people who are encountering his writing for the first time. So I'll ask those of you, the few of you who have read him before, to just kind of hold back. You'll get to speak. But the people who have never read anything by Etgar Keret before, I want to start with that group, with you, and just ask you your general reactions to his writing, without getting into a lot of specifics about the 2 stories, because we'll do that in a few minutes. But just as a writer, what were your reactions to him? Amy, please, and then Alan. Yeah. Yes, unmute, please.
I'm often not a fan of short stories, but I liked these. I often find short stories leaving me wanting so much more, like there's not an ending. And I felt that these two short stories had at least enough of a satisfactory ending for me.
Great, thank you. Yeah, sometimes he does leave us hanging, actually. Myra, I didn't see your hand, I'm sorry. Myra Whittick, are you on my screen?
Yeah, I'm here.
Good job.
I found his style very, very easy to read. It kind of drew me into the story both times, both stories. It almost seemed like it should be for a younger person, like a young adult. So that was my.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, yeah. Alan Friedman, your turn.
At first, I thought what Myra thought, that it seemed like middle school lit, but as I thought about it, it seemed to me that it's almost like a cubist kind of literary style where he takes pieces of ideas and he pastes them together. Like the example about the rules for giving to somebody charity on the street. And he talks about, not making eye contact, being polite, and not giving more than $20. So whoever heard of, that rule before? So he sort of combines the absurd in a natural format. So he like takes apart a concept and he just gives you little pieces of it and leaves you to construct the what he's trying to get at, which makes you have to do a lot of work, or some work, but it's pleasant work to sort of see why he's doing what he's doing, as opposed to, it was a dark and stormy night kind of a story.
Yeah, I really like the reference to art. I just have to take a little smidgen out of his conversation with Ira Glass because it's so relevant. He was describing how he wrote these stories about his mother. He said, I started writing fragmentary stories, and they came out sharp little shards of stories that together made a complete portrait of his mother. So actually all the stories in that collection are about his mother, but the sharp little shards, I thought that was such an interesting way to describe his very short stories, and it does fit with what you're saying, bringing in a cubist comparison. Thank you. Okay, any other thoughts, first reactions to this author from people who had not encountered him before? I'm looking for hands. Yes, Yvonne, please.
I really enjoyed the stories. I thought they were, one of the stories in particular was funny, humorous. I read them twice because I liked them that much.
Wow, can't ask for more than that.
Yeah.
Did you find when you read them again that you noticed things that you didn't see the first time?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, that usually happens for all of us. Okay, well, thank you. I have a nice little collection. We have a nice little collection of first reactions. So rather than asking the same question of the people who have already read him, let's dip into the stories. We'll start with Good Deed, I think. And then we'll discuss, excuse me, Pride and Joy. But I do have to tell you one thing about Etgar Keret that's really important about him as a storyteller. And I think he did refer to it in the biography. It was referred to in the biography that I sent you. His parents were Holocaust survivors. They were not in concentration camps, but his mother was 5 years old when her family fled Poland, and everyone but her mother and baby brother were killed before they ran away. And then her mother and the baby were also killed. So she emerged as, completely alone from the war and emigrated to Israel at age 18. And the father was interned, and he after the war went to Cyprus, and he was living in a bordello because they were taking in orphan children. I just saw a documentary about Edith Piaf, and that's what happened to her too when she was orphaned. She lived in a bordello, and so the father's story. So the parents love to tell bedtime stories to their children, to Etgar and his brother and sister. However, the stories could not be from a book. The stories had to be made up, custom made for the children, because as his mother put it, using a story in a book would be like ordering pizza when you really should be making a whole home-cooked dinner. It was taking a kind of a shortcut. And so all the stories that the children were told when they were growing up were made up by the parents, but based on their experiences, and a lot of them experiences during the war, some of which were quite scary, but they usually had, some kind of happy ending, not to scare the children too much. So I think that gives us a lot of insight into his imagination and how he views storytelling, and particularly for the second story, Pride and Joy. But for now, we're going to look at, if I can find my paper, we're going to look at Good Deed. Okay. So in this story, Good Deed, Etgar Keret is doing what he does very frequently. He takes a common situation that we've all experienced, and he turns it into a story that goes in an unexpected direction, right? So the first sentence actually is not a common experience. That's the uncommon part. A rich woman hugged a poor man. That definitely gets your attention and draws you in, right? But the next few pages are spent giving the background of how did that happen? How did the rich woman, Dara, come to hug this poor man? Well, because he was a homeless man on the street who came up and asked her for money for coffee, which is an experience that probably every one of us has had, and more than once. So he goes back from catching our attention in the first sentence. He goes back and fills in how did this happen? And so the first sentence actually takes us to a different place. It takes us to what becomes a personal relationship, which you don't expect generally to happen between a person of means, or in this case, a rich woman, and a homeless man. You really don't expect that to grow into a relationship. What would be the normal course of things in a situation like that? I mean, if you've ever been in a situation like that, what have you done? It's awkward, right? But maybe you have something that you routinely do in a case like that. Anybody found a way to deal with that dilemma of someone, I mean, basically panhandling on the street? Well, okay, there are all kinds of things you could do. You might give him $1. You might give him a snack or a bottle of water that you have in your glove compartment. You might just go right on by, especially if you're in your car, which is usually when it happens. And so I'm going to read you from another story, a small excerpt from another story by Etgar Keret called Outside, which he wrote during the pandemic. And this was for the New York Times special Decameron project, New York Times Magazine, where several authors were asked to write a COVID story about 6 months into the pandemic. And Etgar Keret, they were from all over the world, and he was one who submitted a very short story called Outside. There was a lockdown, and after 4 months, soldiers come around and they tell people they have to leave their homes, they have to go out. And people are reluctant to go out because they're scared, they're terrified, there's no vaccine yet, they don't want to go out. But the soldiers force them to leave their homes. And so there's like this mass march. It's sort of anti-utopian. It's almost like a repressive regime kind of feeling. And everyone is very mixed up. And after 4 months of isolation, they don't want to go near anybody else. This should feel somewhat familiar. And some of them can't even remember what they did before the pandemic. But there's one little incident that happens. The whole story is 1 page and plus a little more. And here's the section. Near the ATM sits a man wearing dirty clothes, and there's a tin cup next to him. You do remember what you're supposed to do in this situation. You quickly walk past him, and when he tells you in a cracked voice that he hasn't eaten anything in 2 days, you look in the opposite direction, avoiding eye contact like a pro. There's nothing to be afraid of. It's like riding a bike. The body remembers everything, and the heart that softened while you were alone will harden back up in no time. Pretty powerful, huh? So, that's looking at how we look at homeless people and vagrants, and, it's very cynical and it's sad. And this story, Good Deed, is like the total opposite, right? I just wanted to set up that contrast for you. So the first thing that the rich woman realizes, she doesn't have change. She's only walking around with $100 bills, right? And I want to look at the statement on the first page of the story. There are clear rules governing the relationship between the homeless and the average person on the street. What do you think about that? It's harking back a little bit to when I asked you what you do in that situation, but here we're given the ground rules. Yeah. Anybody want to read that part? Barry Goldschmidt. I'm sorry, I forgot your first name already. Ms. Goldschmidt.
Eileen,
Eileen, yes, please, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I don't have the page with me, but
Oh, do you want to make a comment though? Go ahead.
I wanted to make a comment that I guess what we get about homeless people is what we're taught from our parents or our religious values. It's not really a role. You don't have to, but it's up to you whether or not you want to do something.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. There is no rule in our society that says, what you are to do. So where do these rules come from? There are clear rules governing the relationship between the homeless and the average person on the street. These rules are not written down anywhere, right? But apparently through observing social behavior, the narrator here has concluded that, or at least he's putting it in the thoughts of the rich woman. Anybody else want to comment on the ground rules? What about the limit of $20? Why? Okay, Alan, go ahead. Alan, please unmute. Alan,
Sorry, yeah,
okay.
can you hear me now?
Yes.
Maybe this is jumping ahead, but I don't think this story is about a homeless person any more than the COVID story was about COVID. I mean, he sets up a situation which is completely unrealistic, but he's using a sort of a familiar scenario walking down the street. So rich women don't hug poor men, and poor men don't hug rich women. So from the beginning, you know that this is not about that reality. So the rules are another artificial construct. There aren't any rules about what you do with it. You don't have to not make eye contact. You could make eye contact. You could, no, not that many people give a $20 bill to someone. So there's no rule about the hierarchy, but they're sort of setting up a scenario. He's setting up a scenario where things are going to be clearly not about that at all, but he's making this artificial walking down the street thing of the interaction between two people. And, pretty soon it flips, and we're not sure who's the privileged person and who's the not privileged person in this, except for the finances.
Okay, great. Anybody want to jump on that idea of who is the privileged person here? That things do get ambiguous, right? And we're told right away, this is not a typical homeless person. This man is clean shaven. He's not a typical homeless guy. And the woman hugging him, she's certainly not a typical rich woman, or any woman we might know or have observed hugging a homeless man on the street when they don't know each other. Cindy.
I think if anything, he made her feel good. He complimented her. He thanked her. She's never been thanked. She just, gives out of obligation, it seems like. And he made her feel so good that she wanted to spread that feeling to her friends. So that was a good thing that came out of it. But I think he, even by saying, it doesn't matter, you can give me money another time. And he tried to create the relationship by asking what her name was. And so if anything, he made her feel good more than
Very
the other way
nice.
around.
Yeah, Myra, please.
Ultimately, she wasn't doing a good deed to do a good deed. She was doing a good deed to make herself feel good.
Well, she certainly does feel good after this happens. Yes.
But at the end, that's what she needed to be
Yes.
able to do good. That was her need.
Do you think that we all have a need to do good?
Sometimes
A
there's an
human,
ulterior
is that a
motive.
human? I'm going to just float that question without asking for a, overall answer right now, but I think the story does ask that question, Myra. I think you're right about that. Mark, please.
Yeah, I think it's also interesting that when she spreads the word to her friends get all excited about it, and they almost turn into like giving junkies. So
Yes.
they're getting a high off of giving, and they're like fighting each other so that they can give. So I think I see this as somewhat of a sub theme in both his stories, that there's an exaggeration of an emotion or a feeling. And this is one of those exaggerations. So.
I think that's a very insightful comment, Mark. Thank you. Yes, in both stories, there definitely is an exaggeration of an emotion. And if you look at the arc of this story, it starts out with an individual encounter. And then it progresses to, as someone just pointed out, spreads to some other people, friends of the main character. And by the time we get towards the end, we've got Mark Zuckerberg involved, and there's an app to do good deeds. Now, I will bet Etgar Keret knows Mark Zuckerberg and got his permission to put him in this story. I don't know how else he could have gotten away with that, but I frankly absolutely loved that touch. It was so out of nowhere, that, you can look up, like my son has on his phone, this app where you're traveling and you want to find a good restaurant. I don't know what it's called, but you want to find a good restaurant in the area. So you can look it up and it will tell you. Well, this one will help you find a homeless person or, some poor schmo sitting on the street who might be in tatters or in need, and will direct you straight to that person. But it does become between her friends kind of a competition, and each one wants her very own poor person, right, to latch onto and to do good to. So there's as someone said, there's an expansion of a basic situation that expands. Excuse me. I mean, the app could be international, actually, if it and it apparently took off. There are that many people who want to do good deeds, and of course, that's where the title of the story comes from. Is there a yes, please, Lisa?
So I know it was about good deeds, but to me, it really spoke to the emptiness that these women were feeling in their lives, and that it was like, how do we fill this emptiness of unfulfilled relationships? And that was sort of the motivator for them. So it wasn't so much about doing the good deed, but filling a void.
Yeah, very nicely put. It's clear that this homeless man, he's kind of an amateur psychologist, I thought. He sees that Dara wants to talk and she's feeling the need to unburden herself. Her marriage isn't going so well. By the end of the story, she's divorced. I think I've got that right. Yeah. And she wants to talk. And I thought it was really funny when the man said, well, it's okay if you don't have any money, let's go for a coffee and it'll be my treat. Well, he does have some money after all, which, made me wonder on about the fifth reading of the story. Is he a con artist? Like, has he done this to other people? What do you think about that? It's kind of I don't think it's the main point of the story, but did that occur to anybody, that maybe he's got this practiced act and, he's done it for other people?
That didn't occur to me, but what occurred to me was that he's sort of like an angel. And it kind of reminded me of the Abraham story with the strangers appearing at the tent. And he was one of those strangers. So I think that it's an illusion for being an angel. and he ends up being the angel because of all the good that was done by others. So that was the whole ideal, the whole purpose.
Wow. This is great, guys. You are coming up with some amazing ideas and insights. It's a reciprocal relationship, though, because at the end he says, I owe the fact that I turned my life around to you, Dara. Remember, he got a job, stopped doing self-destructive behavior, found a wife, had children, and now he's living a life that he finds fulfilling, and he thanks her. So each of them has gotten something out of this relationship. Another hand, I want to make sure I'm seeing everybody who wants to say something. Yeah, okay, good. Yeah, when she runs into him 6 years later, I mean, both of their lives have changed. And, you know, again, she offers him money. And he refuses it, and he says, no need, like, I don't need it anymore. And she starts to cry, and so he takes the money. What did you make of that? He really doesn't need it, apparently. Yes. Howard, okay, what, I'm sorry.
Sandy.
Sandy, okay, Sandy.
Like, it's as if he was doing her a favor by taking the money to help her feel better about herself.
Yeah. Great. Okay. So I just wanted to say that there are a lot of Jewish values in this story before we move on to the other one. There are a lot of Jewish values in this story, and there's a lot that makes you think about good deeds, which we are, you know, raised to do, as I think Joan said before. We're raised to have these values. And I just went to look at some of the, well, maybe you can quote them. You know, what are some of the Jewish teachings about tzedakah that you think might be underpinning this story? These are things that we say all the time, you know, that we teach our kids.
Do you want me to share that?
Well, I was just going to see if anybody, yeah, in a minute you can screen share, but I just thought if anybody wants to, throw one in the circle.
Maybe that you're supposed to give anonymously.
Yeah, Maimonides, right? Thank you. Maimonides had a ladder of 8 levels of tzedakah. Do you remember learning about this at some point? I think probably most of you do. Starting with the highest level and going down to the lowest level. And it's called sometimes the ladder of tzedakah. So, okay, Valerie, go ahead and put up what I sent you, and we'll just look at this very quickly. I think that Etgar Keret may have had some of these in mind. Thank you. Whoever saves, there are a lot of these things in Pirkei Avot and in the Talmud. Whoever saves a single life is considered by scripture to have saved the whole world. Very famous one. In Pirkei Avot, Ben Azai said, mitzvah goreret mitzvah, one good deed leads to another. That is really true in this story, right? I mean, that's what's happening throughout the story. One good deed starts the ball rolling, and pretty soon there's 2 friends of Dara, and then it spreads, and we get to an app that anyone can get. One good deed leads to another. Hillel, very famous, you know this one by heart. If I'm not for myself, who will be for me? If I'm only for myself, what am I? If not now, when? Applies, it seems to me, to Dara coming across this homeless man in this encounter as the story begins. And Hillel also said, a little less known probably, the more property, the more anxiety, the more charity, the more peace. Really like that, that teaching. Now, for Maimonides, the 8 levels of tzedakah, the highest one is that you would enter into a business partnership or an interest-free loan with the poor person, with the goal of enabling the person to become self-supporting. And the next highest level is the anonymous act of tzedakah, where the benefactor does not know the recipient and the recipient does not know the source of the giver. And on the lower level, level 6, which is almost near the bottom, that's someone who gives charity after being asked for it, which would apply to Dara in this story. She never finds out the name of the homeless man, does she? I just realized, or we never find out. That's interesting. Okay, if you can scroll down a little bit, Valerie, thank you. This one is longer. I'm going to send this to you, or I'll ask Valerie to send it to you, but what it's bringing out is that we all are obligated not to harden our heart against our needy fellow humans. We have to open our hand and lend sufficient for whatever he needs. If you only have $100 bills, then you have to figure out what you want to do about that. There will never cease to be needy ones in your land. Beth, I always think of this when I think of the mission of Jewish Community Services. Okay, Valerie, that's enough for giving us the idea. So just, what do you think about Dara? She's down there on one of the lowest levels on the ladder of tzedakah. But does that make it any less important that she gave? I think the key is what Sandy said, that it makes her feel good. Was that you, Sandy, who said that? Yeah, it makes her feel really good that she has done something. She's done a good deed. And so, that's a reward in itself. Okay, well, we could go on.
In a way, she gave him an interest-free loan, which enabled him to become self-sufficient. And then he paid her back in the end.
How did he pay her back?
When she tried to give him something and he took it, he gave it back to her.
Oh, I thought he kept it. But I really like what you said about.
But he was by taking what she gave him, he essentially gave the loan back.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, I'm glad I brought in Maimonides that you could relate it to that. Myra?
Also, I think the point is, just because somebody's down now doesn't mean they always will be. Sometimes they just need a lift to get themselves going.
That's right. Yeah. Well, yes, well put. Alan Friedman, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to say, well, one thing, obviously, the idea of one good deed goes to another. They've created this amazing app just from the simple act of this very artificial interaction. But I was also going to say is to give Dara the credit. She wasn't giving out of kindness. She was giving out of a sense of an obligation. Now, the obligation was in a sense to herself, that she felt an incomplete person. And she felt that she needed to connect, that the money wasn't connecting for her. And even after 6 years, she hadn't really grown in any way. She didn't know how to relate to someone except to give charity. But she was able to show emotion when he told her he didn't need it. That, she was able to show her weakness, her humanity, her fact that she was dependent on him for the kindness of as was just said by Mark, the kindness of accepting the money was what he did. He gave her the opportunity to be charitable. So that was a great thing. And, the business about, if you give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day. And if you give a man a fishing pole, he'll work for himself. Or as some people say, he'll sit in the boat and drink beer, all day in the boat with the fishing rod. But that's not what the story is supposed to be. So
thank you for that. All right. I think I'm looking at the time. We need to move on to the other story. Nancy put something in the chat. I forgot to say it's hard for me to follow the chat. The app is similar to GoFundMe pages where people give money to people they don't know who need the funds. Yeah, that's good. Nice. Okay. Very good. All right, let's look at Pride and Joy. Where this is a story that starts out sounding perfectly normal, like an almost universal experience where a child is doing well, right? And the parents are proud. He's their pride and joy. He's their only child, and his life is just going really well. And his parents are very proud of him. And yet Etgar Keret takes it in a different direction. So I'm just going to throw this open for like free discussion without structuring it too much on this story. Tell me how you reacted to it, what you think of what Etgar Keret has created here, what kind of situation. Sandra.
I feel like in a way he was taking the stereotype of the Jewish mother and father as martyrs, you know, that they'll do anything for the kids. And so that they, you know, physically were giving him their inches. And I have to say, one of the funniest things I've read in a long time was that line where he was walking and he had them in one pocket of his shirt and they started arguing. So he picked one parent up and put them in the other pocket. It's just so funny, so clever.
What an imagination. I know. It really, that's my favorite part of the story, along with the dog. Etgar Keret puts a lot of dogs in his stories, and they're like Thurber's cartoon dogs. If you remember seeing them, they speak and they have personalities. Well, dogs do have personalities, but these dogs are, you know, to some extent kind of human too. So, all right, we'll get to the dog, but anybody else want to follow up on what Sandra said? Cindy?
Mona has her hand up.
Mona, where's Mona? Okay, yes, please. I have to keep switching screens. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mona.
Oh, that's okay. When I first read it, my husband and I, when the kids were little, would always make up stories every night for the kids. And I had made up one with Bonzo, this 7-foot clown whose parents were tiny and lived in his pockets. And when I read this, I had to send it to my daughter because I said, and my stories always had a moral, like, you know, if he saw something and he didn't do it, his parents would say, you know, and that's what this reminded me of. I mean, it was very bizarre.
Yeah, bizarre. Do you want to pursue that a little bit? Was it unsettling in some way?
To me, it was very comforting because it's the story I was telling my kids, and and I could relate to it. I mean, you know, as he was growing, they were shrinking, but it was, yeah, I found it very enjoyable, very, you know, comforting to me.
Cindy Goldstein says you should publish your stories. Maybe your children will remember them. You could do it together. All right, other comments? Barbara, please.
I thought it was funny. It was amusing. I felt that kind of he was putting the Jewish people in a different. I just thought it was just funny. There's one sentence that I really loved. All through history, the Jews were always considered a smart people, but very short. I mean, that's how he, I don't know, I just found it, you know, I think it was an amusing story.
Is that
he put the Jews in a different place? But it's okay to do that.
Is that what his father?
I thought it was really a funny good story.
Is that what his
Um,
father says to him when they're playing
that's
basketball?
Pretty much the way I felt about it.
Okay,
Um,
thank you. Yeah, it's on page 50, his father, when they're playing basketball, his father says that to him. So, let's just back up for a minute and talk about this shrinking illness or disease that the parents are discovered to have. I want you to notice a couple of things. One is, I'm sure you already did notice, but I'm just pointing them out. It's other people who start to notice that the parents are shrinking. But Ehud, the son, notices it pretty quickly, and he doesn't say anything for quite a long time. Why do you think that is?
He thinks it's normal, or maybe, yeah, he's not sure if it's normal or not.
Well, yeah, he's not sure, but pretty soon he worries. He worries a lot. He starts worrying on page 50. So he was worried about the scary way his parents were shrinking. Maybe all parents are like that. He sometimes tried to reassure himself. And next year they'll teach us about it in science class. That's funny. So right there is where Etgar Keret is moving from realism to surrealism, because this doesn't really happen. But in his heart, Ehud knew something was wrong. The truth was, he wanted to talk to his parents about it, but he felt there were things it was better not to talk about. And on top of 51, he kept silent as if nothing was happening. It seems like he's in denial, but he's worried, right? And it's almost as if he brought it up to his parents, that might make it worse. So in a sense, maybe he's protecting them. I don't know. But if it weren't for the dog, they never would have found out what the disease was. And I thought this part was hilarious, because the dog gets sick and has to go to the vet. And the vet, it turns out, you ever know a vet like this? More than your ordinary vet. He was a family doctor and a gynecologist from South America. So the doctor diagnoses this disease, a rare family disease that results in the child's growing taller, but at his parents' expense. Every inch added onto the child is an inch subtracted from the parents, page 52. So like if it weren't for Zadie the dog fainting in the elevator, they wouldn't have gone to the vet and there wouldn't have been a diagnosis of the disease. So then this thing starts spiraling, because the parents keep shrinking and Ehud keeps growing, and he's desperate to stop it. And the doctor has said to him, the only way you can stop it, well, really, you can't stop it. It will only end when your parents disappear completely. So I think it was the school doctor or the school nurse who said, she gave him all these brochures and he found out how to stunt his growth. So he, this poor kid goes into a whole period of stunting his growth. What does he do to make that happen? I mean, he's really suffering physically and emotionally. Yes, Sandra.
He limits his food intake and his sleep because he knows that you grow more while you're sleeping.
He
And
starts
that's also
smoking.
what makes the story so interesting, is that he has us laughing. It's all really funny. And then in a way, I thought this idea of the parents disappearing, well, every child's fear is that, when they understand that there'll come a day when their parents aren't here anymore, And I feel like, he was kind of playing with that. I mean, it's just a universal fear that kids have, that something could happen, and more horribly while they're still children and their parents could not be there anymore. And you have to wonder with this, like you said, the stories he was hearing from 2 Holocaust survivors, his bedtime stories. You have to wonder how much that, influenced this.
Yeah, yeah. Yes, I think you're really onto something that is preoccupying Etgar Keret here and that he's putting in the story. I saw another hand who's wanted to say something. Did I see another hand? No. Oh, Nancy put something in the chat. Let me see if I can find what she said. Oh, smoking. That was Cindy. Yes, he smokes. Also to stunt his growth. Well, how do the parents react when they see him, when they see their son taking these measures? They see him taking these measures to stunt his growth, but even in the beginning, when they first get the diagnosis from the doctor, and Ehud is really upset, all the way home, I'm looking on page 52, all the way home, Ehud cried, and his parents tried to comfort him. Strangely enough, their terrible fate didn't bother them at all. In fact, they almost seemed to enjoy it. And here comes the sentence that I think is like the key to the whole story. Right in the middle of 52. The mother said, lots of parents are dying to sacrifice everything for their children, but not all of them get the chance. So let's put that in the context of the Holocaust experience to get pretty grim. What happened during the Holocaust? What did parents do to save their children? Many, if they could. They sent them to, Sandra.
They sent them to live with non-Jews in hiding. I mean, there was a whole kinder transport that sent the kids to England to live. I mean, there were horrible stories of moms that got undressed outside the gas chambers and tried to hide babies in the clothing and, things like that. I mean, whatever they could do, they did. Yeah.
Myra? Nancy put in the chat that they sent them, a lot were sent to convents. Their religion was changed. Yes, go ahead, Myra.
I was going to say when he said there's some things that aren't said, it kind of reminded me of anti-Semitism when you hear people make comments, biased comments about other people, and you don't say anything. You're uncomfortable and you kind of look away and you don't talk. And I mean, it escalates into more than just comments. In our case, it escalated into the Holocaust.
Yes. And, if Etgar Keret, I wouldn't be making such a point of this if Etgar Keret himself, every time I've heard him and in everything that he's written about his own writing, if he hadn't brought up the Holocaust and how incredibly influential it is on him has been on him to be the child of survivors. That sentence, the first time I read the story, I just jumped right out at me, and I thought he really, knows what he's talking about there. And that was unfortunately, the experience of millions. Lots of parents literally were dying to sacrifice for their children, hoping that they would survive. These parents in the story, they don't seem to be, I'm not saying that they're making a direct reference to the Holocaust. I don't think they are, but I think that Etgar Keret wants us to see that level of it. Other thoughts on this? Okay, Alan, yes.
You're muted.
Maybe the boy is really worried about obviously about his parents getting older and dying. As he gets more worldly and accomplished, he becomes aware that his parents are less of a factor in his life, that they are figuratively shrinking. But on the Holocaust theme, I think he's afraid of losing his parents. Like, he wants to try to save his parents as opposed to what can the parents do to try to save their children. He's thinking, I'm losing my parents like surviving children did, like our former Secretary of State was pushed away into a monastery or somewhere and survived that way. So I think that's why he's taking up this self-destructive lifestyle to try to take all the illness onto him, with the smoking and the poor nutrition and the lack of sleep, to sort of retard the process. That's part of the absurdness of the whole story, the superficial part of the whole story, to try to save his parents that way.
And he does succeed. I mean, they don't disappear completely. They seem to reach a point of, I guess you'd say, equilibrium, where they've shrunk about as much as they apparently are going to. I mean, we don't know that for sure, but at the end, his life has gotten back to, he has some joy in his life. He has a girlfriend, and I just love the scene when the parents are saying, kiss her, whispering from the pocket. And it's very sweet. Yes. Sandy.
So starting at the beginning of the story, when it was talking about the parents who were really obnoxious because of other people, you were tired of hearing about their wonderful child and things like that. And as a former teacher, it made me think of the helicopter parents that we used to refer to, the parents who were hovering over everything that the child would do, which was really obnoxious as a teacher. So those are my thoughts.
Yeah, I wanted to get to that actually, because, there is another side, a very contemporary side to this story. If we put aside the Holocaust underpinnings of it and just look at parenting in general, would you say that parents today are, well, we can't generalize, but I mean, are there parents who do sacrifice maybe too much for their children, who are overly involved in their children's lives? I mean, it's interesting that at the end of the story, Ehud becomes the parent figure. His parents are completely dependent on him at the end, as he, when a baby, was completely dependent on them. But, what do you think about, is there some message here for parents today, do you think? How much to get involved in your child's life? How much to define yourself by your child's achievements? Or what expectations are you putting on your child? I know I'm getting kind of psychological here, and we don't have to do this beat your breast thing as parents. Probably most of our kids are grown up, but yeah, Beth, the social worker
will talk about boundaries, and that there were just no boundaries going on, like between everything was all sort of intertwined. I mean, it was sort of a real commentary on boundaries, even the relationship with the dog, and the dog's name was Zadie. I mean, it was just like a lot going on, so that's kind of how I sort of saw it, as sort of that, a parody on that, but also some real stuff too, about how not real healthy that, how unhealthy that can be.
It's interesting that Etgar Keret and his wife have one child. They have a boy named Lev. I'm wondering whether I'm sure he's very aware, and his wife, that bringing up one child, you're investing everything in that child, right? Not to say that if you have more than one, you're not investing everything in all of them, but this is it. This is apparently the only child they're going to have, and it's it's a question that parents have to ask themselves. I mean, some children push back, right? Some children really don't want their parents to be involved, and others seem to revel in it. It's very individual. Eileen, please.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, good to see you. So I was thinking like these parents, are overly involved, in every aspect of his life, smothering him, and it has the reverse effect for them. They just get smaller and smaller and smaller and less important in their son's life. And then he takes over. I just thought it was really interesting, the way that it had the reverse effect and they became less needed. So if you smother your child, then it could come out the reverse in that the roles change and you are not you're not as needed in your kid's life because they just want to to get away, to separate from the parents. But I also wanted to comment on the ending, and I just thought it was really interesting. Like he kind of gave us a little bit of sweetness there with the parents are tiny, they're in the pockets, but the dad's saying kiss her, and the mom giving him a little jab with her elbow of pride and joy, even though they're tiny and their lives have been reduced to inches, they're still right in there. I don't know, I thought that was and gave it a little sweetness at the end, but
Thank you. I'm wondering,
I really like this story.
Great. Thank you, Eileen. I'm wondering what the Hebrew for pride and joy is, because, all these songs were written in Hebrew and translated, but, pride and joy is almost a cliche. And we do say of our children, she's my pride and joy, or he's my pride and joy. So I don't know what, sorry?
Quelling.
Quelling, yes. Yes, they
That would
quell.
be Yiddish, I guess.
But to the point where it turns off other people, we do know parents like that. Hopefully we don't do it too much ourselves. But I know parents who go to the opposite extreme and will never talk about their children's achievements because they don't want to be seeming to boast. Sometimes it's superstition, and mostly it's just they feel it's unseemly in some way to boast about their children. And then you have the opposite extreme too. So I think Etgar Keret is sort of interested in human behavior on the whole spectrum of it. Elisa.
So when I first started reading the story and, about the parent shrinking, to me, what immediately hit me was, well, I wonder if the shrinking is punishment for being so boastful. And that's sort of how I interpreted the shrinking. But then as the story developed, you saw the real love between the son and his parents. So I sort of changed a little bit in terms of my interpretation, but that was my initial reaction to, oh, they're shrinking because they're engaging in this boastful, improper behavior.
You're bringing up something that I didn't point out, Elisa. Thank you. And I think it's important. Ehud really changes during this story, right? In the beginning, he's kind of full of himself. You can hardly blame him because that's the message he gets from his parents constantly. He thinks he's pretty hot stuff. And by the end, he's gone through this whole cycle of really worrying about his parents and dangerously harming his own health to keep them alive. And there clearly is love there. And so by the end, he seems to have matured a lot. And as I said, he becomes the parent figure. He's, I forgot how old he is, 10, something like that. All right, Nancy is saying something in the chat. Let me just get to that. May I, Nancy, do you want to read it? Can we hear you?
Nancy has no camera or microphone. That's why.
Oh, okay. Okay. So she writes, my mom said her mother did not boast about her because she was trying to avoid the evil eye. Yeah. Her mother would stick her thumb between two other fingers to avoid the evil eye. And Myra Whittick put something in the chat about survivor's guilt. Yeah, which I guess Etgar Keret's mother knew something about that. Okay, I just want to read you one little piece of, where did I get this from? April 24th, when Etgar Keret spoke at the Gordon Center last year. And he was describing the way he writes a story, his process of writing a story. And I think there's a neat parallel in this particular story of Pride and Joy. He said he likes the freedom to write and get away from, this is a quote, the petrified respectability of literature. Isn't that a great phrase? The petrified respectability of literature. I mean, he certainly does seem to be breaking a lot of conventions in his writing. And so when he writes a story, he goes back over it and he tries to read it, eliminating one sentence at a time. And then if it still works, he cuts that part out and he prunes the story down to the bare essentials. And he said, it's like packing a suitcase. You get it down to the essentials. I'm a packer like that. I put too much in and then I start taking things out because I can't close the suitcase. I thought that was a wonderful metaphor for his writing process. And I don't know if he had pride and joy in mind, but the fact that the people are shrinking, down to they don't lose their personality is what I'm saying. His parents still have their personality. They still love their son. They still have pride and joy. And they're satisfied with their lot. They don't take it as a calamity. His stories carry on. His stories carries on.
I think she means like carry on luggage.
Carry on luggage.
A novel would be a big.
Stories are like carry on luggage. I love it. Thank you, Nancy. All right, I think it's time to wrap up. Would anyone like to say anything else about either of these stories or Etgar Keret as a writer? I could ask for a show of hands who after reading these two and discussing them might like to read more Etgar Keret. Well, let's put you on the spot. All right, lots of people like these stories. Excellent. I think in the bio that I sent you, it said that his books are among the most frequently stolen from bookstores. Did you see that? I'm sure he loves that claim to fame. It's really wonderful.
Gail, I wonder what the name of this is in Hebrew. I'd like to find out. I wonder if it was something like, Jay said it could have been like Simcha v'Sason or something like that.
Sason v'Simcha.
Sason v'Simcha or Nachas. I don't know.
Let me see which it.
The Hebrew word for pride is gava, but I have a feeling that there's another idiom.
Yeah.
There's no way that he had a Hebrew title that just translated just perfectly into an English idiom.
Right.
So there must be a way to look it up and see what the Hebrew title is.
Right.
Well, I can tell you what collection it came from. It's actually on the first page of the story where there's a very short bio, the Nimrod Flip Out.
Yeah, I saw that.
So if we could get it in Hebrew, I'll try and find out.
We'll have to find out. Yeah. See if it was
one of the Schechter Israeli teachers might know it. Or if anybody wants to volunteer to do the detective work, feel free to dig around and see if you can come up with it in Hebrew.
Right.
So next time we're going to be doing a completely different author and completely different subject matter. It's Michael Oren, the Michael Oren, the famous one. And much to my amazement, and a lot of other people's, when he published a couple years ago a collection of his short stories, people did not know that he has been writing poems and stories almost all his life. And so it will be a treat to see him in another role as an author. And I'm looking forward to discussing that one with you. I know Valerie will send it to you in plenty of time. Any other thoughts or questions? I want to thank you all for participating. I think almost everybody said something tonight, and even if you didn't, that's fine. I want everyone to be comfortable and, participate to the extent that you are comfortable doing that. So thank you all so much. Thank you, Valerie, for hosting. And I will send you the tzedakah quotes and the link to the interview with Etgar Keret. So enjoy that. Okay, everybody be well.
Thank
Good
you,
night.
Gail.
Thank you,
Thanks
Gail.
so
Thank you,
much,
Gail.
Gail. It's great to
Really
see
enjoyed
you.
it.
Yeah, remember
Bye.
when Etgar Keret spoke, you were sitting right behind me and you were taking
Oh,
notes, and you knew that you were going to use some of this in your
yeah,
teaching.
I have.
You did
I
a great
have
job.
lots of notes. And, years and years ago, I did the story Pride and Joy. I can't even tell you how long ago. I did it once before at Bethel. And there's a guy who was in that class. Every time he sees me at Bethel, he comes up to me and he says, I just love that story where the parents are in the pocket, the guy's pocket. It's probably been like 20 years ago.
So great.
Still remembers that story.
That's great.
Yeah,
Well, we
what an
say
imagination.
we carry them on our shoulder, right? Those who came before
Mhm.
us, they're always on our shoulder, talking in our ear. But
Hmm.
maybe it's the really thing, they're in the pocket.
It
not on the
reminds me of what my mother-in-law said. My mother-in-law, this time was a little too late for her, but she's
Oh,
watched
I
the
missed her.
recording. And
Yeah.
she's a novelist and a short story writer. So when she talked about how hard it is to do these, it really made me think of when he's talked about how he goes through each line to see what's essential and what's not essential.
Mm.
It's harder to write one of these stories than it is to write
Oh,
a novel in
very.
many ways.
Yeah. Some critic I read a long time ago said, oh, Etgar Keret, he just is sitting on a bus and he dashes these things off in 5 minutes and publishes them. And everyone says, yay, no, I don't believe that at all. I think he really labors over it, but he loves it. That's
Makes
by the
it
way,
seem easy.
He makes
That's
it
a
seem
gift.
very easy, but it's
Yeah.
the opposite, I'm
Yeah,
sure.
he started writing when he was in the Army. He talked in one of his in one of the talks he gave about how in the Army he was a terrible soldier because he questioned the reason for the rules all the time. He wanted to know, why do we have to do this? And the commanders, of course, were not happy with him, so they gave him an office job. And it was so boring. It was a night job in the office, I guess, on the base. That's when he started writing. He was lucky they didn't put him in solitary confinement.
He's very creative.
Okay, everybody, have a very good evening. Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you,
All right,
Valerie.
Gail.
Eileen, good to
Bye-bye.
see you.
Bye.
Bye, thank
Bye.
you.
Oh, good to see you, Cindy.